Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of Project Fairlady. And haven't I got some fun in store for you guys today. Let's head down the back of the car and I'll show you what I'm working on. So I've got the engine wiring loom on a bit of a makeshift bench here, folks, just so I've got enough length to kind of stretch it out. With this sort of a task, guys, you've just got to take your time, chill out, try not to rush through things, make notes for yourself, you know, double, triple check everything that you're doing. Kind of take a bit of time to get your head into the wiring loom, just so you become familiar with everything, you know. This one's been a little bit extra hard due to the fact that this vehicle had an aftermarket ECU fitted to it by the same people who did a lot of the work on the vehicle, which, as you've seen from all my previous videos, is very, very substandard sort of work. So it's been a bit of a mixture of connectors that have just been cut off, with wires taped up, with nothing to kind of ID what they were for. A lot of this is made harder by the fact that I'm not very familiar with this vehicle. I've never pulled one of these wiring looms apart or really, you know, had much to do with these vehicles at all. I've got a couple of wiring diagrams that I downloaded off the internet that are being very helpful. I think I've pretty much got it sorted now. I've certainly got a few hours into it so far to be able to label everything. I actually labelled what I could as I stripped it off the engine. But there were a lot of things, as I say, that just didn't go anywhere, like a lot of stuff's been disconnected as well, with connectors still there but not going into anything other than the ones that just had the connectors cut off. So the first thing you got to do with this sort of thing, folks, is you've got to strip off all the outer casing of all the wiring looms, just so a little bit of that mask has been pulled off so you can sort of see what's running where and get a bit of an idea of how it all lays back. Running back from your ECU connector here, and it also helps you be able to see the state of the thing, you know. This was in very, very poor condition on the outside, particularly where stuff was near a heat source, you know, near the exhaust system, the turbos and all that sort of thing. But the loom does have a fair bit of protection in those areas, and what seems to be a very brittle, hard to move kind of thing, a lot of that is just in the outer casing, so it's actually done its job quite well. There were a few things that I found, mainly, you know, close to the ends of the connectors, where some of the cables have been really, really baked and are breaking and have cracks in them all the way along. One thing I did find was there's a short in the cable that controls the VTC solenoid for both banks, where it goes back to the ECU connector. This is it here, that's why it's uncovered. It's two green wires there. It's got a bit of an intermittent thing. I don't know whether that was actually an issue with the engine and that showed up, you know, while the car was running, whether there were problems with it, whether it worked, whether it didn't work, whether it had an intermittent problem. But there's definitely something going on there, because I couldn't actually test those wires until I started wiggling and fiddling around with the ECU connector. And so, as you'd imagine with this, folks, heaps of stuff needs to be changed. You know, all the injector connectors and all of the ignition coil connectors all need to be changed, just because I'm running, you know, different stuff. I'm unsure at this stage whether I'll actually take them all the way back to the ECU connector, or whether I'll just splice something in. I've really got to look at that as I do it and sort of see, you know, see what the go with it is. A lot of the other connectors need to be replaced as well, folks. A lot of the locking tabs are broken off on heaps of the other connectors. Plus there's quite a bit of corrosion within the pin connectors themselves. So it all has to be gone over in great detail. So all in all, everything that I've found in here is not really too bad considering the age of the vehicle. It's pretty typical, really. You know, the fact that it's been dicked around with by someone else is probably the worst part of it. And speaking of dicking around with, folks, a lot of this down here has been cut into. People have been intercepting some of these signals for the use of in gauges for this gauge setup that they have. They've used speaker wire to cut into this with in a few spots, and other various bits and pieces. You know, it's pretty horrendous. It all needs just cleaning right up. So basically I've got to strip the whole thing apart, just so that I know it's got a really good clean bill of health. You can see why this type of thing can lead to, you know, intermittent problems with your vehicle as well as sort of time goes by. So if you get the chance, folks, if you've got your engine loom out, you know, have a good look at it, tear it all apart. It's a bit of work. It means you've got to re-insulate it all and all that sort of stuff, but you know, at least you'll get a good idea of the condition of it and you know, if there are any flaws with it. So I'll get stuck into this and I'll give you a bit of a look at it once I'm a little bit further along. Hopefully I'll have a lot of the stripping out done, maybe some new stuff done, but I'll be back shortly. Right, so I'm a little bit further along now, folks. A lot of stuff that I didn't need has been removed from the loom, and a couple of things have been added in. And that's just some of the wire that's been pulled out of it, folks. I've already emptied this bucket once, and yeah, you can see there's quite a bit still in there. You can see these two guys here. One's your crank angle sensor, and the other's the cam home signal lead. So this is 3-core screened Tefsel wire. And that basically replaces these cables, which were in the factory wiring loom. This is your crank angle sensor, and your airflow meter had another one roughly the same size. So 2 of those have been replaced by 2 of these, which gives you a little bit of room back. Plus a whole heap of stuff's been pulled out of there that wasn't needed, you know. You can see I've got a whole heap of new connectors here because a lot of the connectors are busted and just you know, need replacing. You know, new injector connectors and a couple of Deutsch connectors, just, you know, just sort of general stuff. You know, I'll show you some of the typical things that are issues. I'll just set the camera down so we can hopefully see this. What's this? Right, so this is a knock sensor connector that was on the car. So you can see the ground wire here has actually just broken, and you can see all the cracks in it, and this is hard as a rock. If you bend this, you'll actually break it, you know, like it's just really, really hard. The signal wire has got cracks in it as well. This had actually been disconnected. I'd say there was an issue with it. It was probably tripping because of the bad connections, you know. Again, the locking tab's broken off it, and the wire's just in a really, really poor condition. And that's kind of just typical of the stuff that I've found. Here you go, here's something else. What's this? Okay, that's your passenger side inlet cam. Again, the locking tab's missing off it. So yeah, she is trimmed down quite a bit. There is stuff that I need to add into it. All the injector connectors here have just been sort of cut off at this stage, so they'll have to be sort of rewired and probably the wire completely replaced. Same with all the coil wires, they're just kind of loose. I've got, you know, there's basically just sort of half done wiring everywhere, but it's certainly in a more sorted state than it was before. Another thing I've discovered here, folks, someone's chopped a hole in the firewall grommet for the ECU. I assume they were probably trying to poke a wire through there at some stage and didn't really kind of understand how blocked off this is at the back, you know, like it's just impossible to sort of do that unless you've got this out. And unfortunately, without taking every connector off the wiring loom, I can't replace this. So I think I'm going to patch that, put some tape behind it, maybe put some Celastic over it, maybe see if I can get some heat shrink to go over the top of it. But yeah, it really won't be too much of an issue. But yeah, things you find, folks, the things you find. Alright, I'll carry on and I'll be back again when I do a bit more on it. Alright folks, I'm back, and there's been a bit of a change of plans. I tried to battle on through it, but there were just too many issues with the old wiring loom. So at least this way I was able to get rid of the old Haltech plug and play adapter and just go straight into the new Haltech ECU itself and completely get rid of the factory ECU connector. This has also allowed me to get rid of this old firewall grommet that had been hacked up by the previous owner, or the previous clowns, shall we call them, who did this previous bit of wiring on it. Nice new grommet there. You can actually get those from Raceworks here in Australia. They make a grommet that's almost identical to the Nissan unit, same size and everything, you know. So it's basically all now Tefsel and Raycam Motorsport wire, other than where the power wires have come in from the factory fuse box in the engine bay. I've integrated that wiring back into the ECU loom just because that section of it was pretty good, and that supplies all your injector and ignition power and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So that's just been basically you know, woven back into it before it's been taped up and heat shrunk and everything. So all the taping up's been done with Tessa tape and you know, Nitto tape. Nitto is just your basic sort of black electrical tape, but it's a really good quality. It sticks very well to itself. The Tessa is really good, super strong, creates a really good seal, other than the fact that it doesn't stick to itself real good. I always struggle with Tessa at the end of looms, you know, like I'll generally finish it up and put a bit of heat shrink around it to stop it sort of unraveling. But yeah, so that's the only issue I sort of have with that. So it's basically all taped up, and then it's heat shrunk, and you know, and it's all sort of stepped back. There's quite a bit of work in doing the heat shrink to get it so that it's nice and sort of well organized, but yet still flexible. There's a bit of technique involved in it, folks. I'll show you a little piece just for a bit of a look. So you can see this area here, folks. That's sort of the thing that you have to do. This is a really complicated area here. There's lots of breakouts from the sort of main loom. So all the sections of loom where we've got a breakout, they're all just taped up with the Tessa tape. So it's really sort of tight and pretty much waterproof at all the joins. And then heat shrink is done on each section. You've got to sort of work backwards with all this, and one of the last things you do is pull a piece of heat shrink down over your breakout point and then sort of shrink it so that you get something like this where it's all sort of held really nice and tight, so you don't have the chance to put a lot of undue stress on sort of any of your breakout points. And generally what I'll do on ends like this, what's this guy? It's our left-hand injector loom. What I'll do here is I'll get it all set up to this point so that all of the breakouts are all heat shrunk and all sort of contained. And before I do the connector, I'll cut another piece of heat shrink, slide it on, do the connector, and then slide that piece back up to the connector and shrink it so that you get heat shrink all the way up to your connector without having to try and cut really close to where your heat shrink is, and then get it in your connector and still be really neat. I'm also going to be labeling everything, and how I do that, folks, is just with clear heat shrink, and I just print them out on my printer from inside the house, cut them down, wrap it around, put some clear heat shrink over the top, and Bob's your uncle, mate. They're done. They seem to last really well. So what I'm about to do, folks, is take it over to the motor and fit it all up, poke it through the firewall, get it all sort of set up on the engine so I can work out whether or not these lengths are all sort of suitable, and nip them all off to the right lengths so that I can then bring it back here to the bench and start setting up all the connectors on it. So we'll get this back on the car and have a bit of a look at the lengths, eh? That's how she's looking, folks. It's all set up now so I can gauge the length of all the individual pieces so that I can set them up for the connectors, you know, the ignition coil connectors, the fuel injector connectors and everything. And you know, just trim back everything that I need to so that I can sort of do that work on the bench without having to sort of, you know, bend over the motor, because it's actually quite awkward. It's a fair way in. You can see I've had to do a bit of setup stuff there. The R35 coils are in, the top feed fuel rails in, just so I've got more exact positions on everything. These are the cam and crank sensor wires. Obviously they'll need a bit of trimming up, and same deal, I need to fit everything up so I can get all the connectors and all the heat shrink and everything on those. Coming along fairly well. It's been on and off quite a few times though, folks, as you'd imagine. This is I don't know, maybe the third or fourth time I've had it sort of through the firewall and sitting in position to try and gauge, you know, the layout and all that sort of stuff. So I think I've got a little bit more sorted, so I'll get it back out, get it back to the bench, start doing connectors and stuff, I think. So I'll see you back there. Alrighty, here we are, folks, back at the makeshift bench. It's time to sort of get a few connectors on. You can see here, bit of a setup there. You can see that's ignition coil 4, ignition coil 6. You can see our injectors, injector connectors, they're all labelled and everything. So what I thought I might do for you guys is show you the process of finishing off a little bit of a run going through the whole process. So that's where this is set up for the moment. This is the injector connector for cylinder 2 that I'm doing at the moment, and you can see the heat shrink has all been like layered back, so all of our breakouts are all sealed and everything back to this point here, and it's cut to length, so the injector is going on the end of this. So the first thing we've got to do is put our clear heat shrink on for the label. You can see this is some 5mm clear heat shrink, pre-cut in little suitable sizes here. First thing we'll do is just slip that guy on all the way down there. And now for a bit of heat shrink, I generally just line up with the last bit and then go to the end of the wire there, and that allows me to go down by the amount that the connector is on. So we'll just trim that off there. We'll slip this guy on next. Down that goes. Next are our weatherproof seals for the cables. Slip those on. Pointing bit goes on last, because that's the bit that gets crimped onto the connector when it goes on. Okay, so there we go, and that's what we have now, folks. So we've got our label heat shrink ready to go. We've got our sleeve that's going to cover up this last bit of the open wire once we get the connector on. Our weatherproof seals for the wires, and we're now ready to start crimping some terminals on. I'll just grab 3 terminals. Alright, we'll grab our strippers. So we're looking at knocking off about 5-7mm, I guess, or something. It's 1, 2, 3. Start our first crimp. Lay him in. I'll start with D and I'll finish with E on the crimpers. D gets it on loosely. You can then sort of push it up all the way to where you've crimped, and then finish it off with E so it's nice and snug. Like that. Careful you don't over squeeze them there, folks, because they'll get jammed in your crimpers. Righto, next thing we do is our weatherproof sleeve here. So what I generally do, folks, is I will bend the wire back up like this, push the thing down, and then bend it back down to the connector. And then we fully do this with C on the crimpers. And don't overdo this guy, because they will tend to mangle if you overdo them. Just snug, not loose, but not tight, but snug. And that's that one. That actually didn't turn out real good, that last bit. But you know, that's only it's fine, but it's just not super neat. So we'll do another one. Alright, we'll do our ground wire. Sit him in. Start with D on your crimpers. Make sure it's pushed in. Finish it with E. Give it a bit of a tug. So bend it up. Put the seal on, bend it back down, and crimp it in C. Hopefully this one will turn out a bit neater. Oh yes, that one's perfect. Alright, and that's what a perfect one should look like, folks. So sometimes they end up a little bit bent when you've crimped them, but what I normally do, the end of your crimpers have got a sort of a flat bit in the end. I'll hold it in there, have a bit of a look at it, and just straighten it up, just because it makes it quite a bit easier to get it into the connected body when you're assembling it. If they're a bit bent and a bit wonky, they'll be hard to push in. Alrighty, last one. D. Hold it in E, push it up, give it a squeeze. Give it a tug. Lots of tugging going on here, folks. And it back down. And do that guy with C. Another good one. Turned out pretty good. Alright, so there you go. We've got our 3 crimps done. Now we need a connector. And with your R35 GDR coils, folks, you've got your ground goes in the center here, like so. So looking from the back of it, folks, our signal goes in on the left hand side. Just get this around the right way. Now power goes in on the right hand side. Alright, so they're all in, as you can see. It's very nice. And down in there, we'll just click our locking piece back in. So now, first thing we've got to do here, pull our heat shrink back up, folks. Just sort of get that, nip that in as tight as you can. Get that heat shrink there. Just kind of hold it. Give it a bit of a shrink. Now, I haven't done the bottom here because I'm a little bit close. Actually, I'm not that far from the label. Often I'll do it and then slide the label up, or the label sleeve, like this, just so it's out of the way when I shrink the bottom, so I don't risk shrinking that label part of the sleeve like that. Alright, I'll just finish this off. Alright. So you can see now that's just a really nice little piece there, folks. Now, so you can see here I've got a little bit of a handful of labels that I've made. They've just been done on my printer, on my home computer, and I've just cut them out to a size that's sort of suitable. I'll find the right one. I'm after ignition coil 2, and we'll put it on and shrink it. And this is our guy here. Ignition coil 2. So what we'll do, we'll just wrap him around. Camera's in my way, folks. I can't really get comfortably on this. Doesn't matter. Slide our heat shrink on. Use a few pokey things to get it all sort of positioned properly. See if I grip that Actually, there we go. Let's check this. Now, I try to set everything up so that when it's plugged in, the label is visible. Now, because they plug in that way, I won't be able to read it from right there. It's actually looking pretty good, folks. I think I might just shrink that on right there. A little bit windy out here too, folks. My little shrinker's not working the best. It's alright, but when you're in the shed with all the doors shut and everything, it's fantastic. But I'm working at the roller door at the moment and it's open behind me, so little puffs of wind doesn't take much to disturb it. Anyway, there you go. So we've got ignition coil 2 and that's all done. And oh, there's one I've missed putting the cover back on, the locking tab. And there you go, that's our left hand bank of ignition coil connectors. So I am getting there, folks, as you can see. A lot of connectors on. So I'll keep going with this and I'll give you another look when all the connectors are on. See you then. Right, folks, that's looking pretty much done now. So I might break it down into sections for you and we'll just have a bit of a talk over the final thing and I'll point out a bit of stuff. So I'll go to the ECU connector end and we'll start there. So this is our 34 pin and our 26 pin Haltech ECU connectors. This is for the Elite Series ECUs. Now you can see there's a few extra breakouts here. This breakout here is for the ethanol content analyzer, fuel pressure and fuel temperature. What's this guy? Okay, that's the fuel pumps. So I have 2 fuel pump triggers there. I've put an extra one in because I'm possibly going to change over to 2 fuel pumps instead of 1. I don't know yet. I'll sort that out later, but I thought I might as well wire in a second trigger while I'm doing it. And this is a high power CAN connector that I made up and sort of wired in. And the reason I've done that is when you wire your Haltech oxygen sensor kit in, your WB1 or your WB2, they give you like a fly lead that you have to wire in to power an engine ground and stuff, because the standard connector on your basic wiring harness that you'll get from Haltech doesn't have heavy enough wire in it, particularly on the ground side, to be able to handle the current for the heaters in the oxygen sensors. So that's why they sort of give you an extra fly lead to sort of wire in, why you can't just sort of plug it in. But what I've done here just means that I don't have to do that, so I can actually plug the WB2 straight into that and not need any of the fly lead stuff, just because I've already wired it into the heavy duty side of it. The normal ground cable in this breakout wire that comes on your Haltech wiring loom is wired into the sensor ground, whereas this is wired into the engine ground, which is what it needs to be and what the Haltech fly lead does. I also have a couple of unused wires here. They're sort of not needed, and I also have a complete spare loom here. I think there's like 9 wires in there that I can use for extra gauges or trigger wires or whatever. They're 24 gauge, but they are really high quality wires, hence the reason why it's only a fairly small looking sort of a loom. That's one of the benefits of using all the you know, the Raychem and Tefcel Motorsport wiring, is the jacket is quite thin but super durable and heat and chemical resistant. You know, all the wires in general take up a hell of a lot less space, which is why the whole loom tends to look a lot smaller than what you're probably used to seeing on factory stuff that's of an age where a lot of the outer insulation jackets were a lot sort of chunkier and not as good. And down here we obviously have a heat shrink finishing at this point, and then we run into tape here. This is Tessa fleece tape. Fantastic stuff, great conformity, and also sticks to itself really well. Best stuff to use. It's just so good to use. But it's not rated for use in engine bays, which you often see a lot of people use it in engine bays because it's just so good to use. I think it's only rated at about, well, don't quote me, I think it might be 105 or 110 degrees C. Whereas the other Tessa tape, and I've got a couple of rolls here, I'll show you the difference. Yeah, here we go. So that's fleece tape, and this is the engine bay rated Tessa tape. They're both Tessa brand, and the engine bay stuff's rated to about 150 degrees C, I think, and this might be 110 or maybe 120. But yeah, they Tessa don't recommend using this in engine bays, although you see a lot of people use it, you know, and I'm sure they know what they're doing and you know, have pretty good results with it. But you know, I tend to just generally stick with what manufacturers recommend. Not as nice to use this stuff. It's a lot sort of harder to make it conform, and as I mentioned earlier on in the video, it doesn't stick to itself quite as well, but it still sticks pretty good. But yeah, super heat resistant, really good. Alrighty, so let's move along a little bit, shall we? And by the way, folks, I just thought I might let you in on some of the process of doing this with some of the wiring diagrams. You can see up here I have two Haltech Elite basic wiring harness layouts. That just gives me the layout of the connectors, because I've used, I haven't actually used a Haltech loom. I've just bought Haltech connectors and pins to go into the Haltech ECU that I'm using. But yeah, to obviously to work out all the functions of each pin, you need some sort of a, you know, a wiring guide or whatever. So I'm using that. This here is your factory 300zx ECU connector, looking at it from the harness side, which is great to tell you the function of each wire in the factory harness and what they do, so that you can duplicate those functions on your sort of custom wiring loom, just to make sure that you have everything covered and there is nothing that you've missed. Over here I'm using, these are two layouts for the Haltech plug and play adapter, which I'm not using. This is a Haltech plug and play adapter layout for an Elite Series ECU, which I am using, but with a custom loom. So I've used this as a reference to see what pins Haltech assigns to what jobs with their plug and play adapter, you know. And the main reason for that is that when I do download a base map from Haltech, a lot of these pins and stuff will already be assigned. It just means there's quite a bit less work in the setup. And also I have here my things, so you've got to make your own notes as you go along, folks, and most of this has been done with pen as I've sort of gone along. So I have my own layouts and assignments laid out for each connector. It's a 34 pin, there's your 26 pin connector, so I can keep track of everything. So I have the function and the wire color on most of this stuff, plus I have a lot of information on this as well. Between those two sets there, I have a really good record of the way the wiring loom's been done, what wires go where and what their functions are and all that sort of stuff. And last but not least, I have a coloured in version of the Nissan ECCS wiring diagram, which is your engine control system wiring diagram, showing you all the relays and you know, all the power sources for all the wire that runs into here, which basically some of it comes down through this connector here, which I'm pretty sure is the F2 connector. And then also there's another, as we go up there I'll show you, there's another two other Nissan connectors which run from the fuse box in the engine bay that are integrated in the wiring loom that brings your injector and ECU power and other things in. They both have various functions. So for example, I think pretty sure your speed sensor comes in from here, and I've de-pinned a lot of these. Like that was, you know, I've probably only got a third of the pins in there that were originally used, because a lot of it's for stuff that the car no longer uses. The Haltech can do a lot more function than the original ECU. It's like any old computers, folks. You know, you think of your sort of laptops and your home computers that were around in 1989 when this thing was made, compared to like modern processors and all that sort of stuff. Your Haltech is capable of doing so much more, so much faster, and hence, you know, you can actually get rid of a lot of the wiring out of there. All right, let's move along a bit. All right, so you can see here, a bit of heat management's been done, folks. This is where our firewall grommet is. Comes out above the exhaust, above the turbo on the passenger side there, and then this kind of snakes along past the exhaust manifold. That's a fairly heavy sort of a fiberglass, an adhesive fiberglass tape with a sort of an aluminized backing on it. Really, really good stuff, and still fairly flexible as well. Very, very heavy duty. I use that, and I use some lighter stuff, which I'll show you on a couple of other things. I probably will be putting a little bit more heat management into this once it's fitted up on the motor. When I have the motor out on a stand at the moment, it's too awkward with the engine in the engine bay to, you know, address some of those kind of heat management issues. But there will be just pieces here and there going on stuff, you know, just as I can sort of identify areas that may need it. So you can see all the new factory Nissan connectors are on. There's only 2 wires here that I haven't done. That's your the FIC D and the IAC valve. Those 2 valves in that one area. I have some new connectors coming for those, so obviously they're not done. A few Deutsch connectors here. That's your boost controller, which will be running up sort of in that spot. This is another one of the Bosch coolant and pressure sensor connectors here. This is for coolant pressure. I'm not running coolant temperature off this. I'm using only 1/2 of that sensor, but I do want to be able to monitor coolant pressure for things like, you know, blow a hose, lift the heads. If you're running a heap of boost, you'll get a spike in your coolant pressure, things like that. And the more sensors and everything that you have fitted, folks, the more comprehensive an engine protection strategy you can set up in the ECU, you know, to protect your engine. If you've got a lot of dollars tied up in your engine, folks, the more engine protection you can set up, the better, you know. What have we got here? Here's a good one. You'll remember our old knock sensor connector that I showed you when we were in the early stages of looking at this wiring loom. So you can see what we've got there now. It's all nice brand new wiring. It's got knock written on it, so you don't plug it into the wrong thing. Nice brand new Nissan connector. All ready to go, folks. Up here I have 2 air temperature connectors. I'm running pre and post intercooler air temperature sensors, just so I can sort of monitor the efficiency of the intercoolers and make changes. Or I'm possibly thinking about maybe putting a water spray thing on there, and I don't know. But having them there, you know, it's a bonus. Obviously you need one. You need your post air temperature for your ECU to run properly, and the other one is really just for a monitoring purpose. And again, all this stuff is really just so there's a lot of stuff you can use for engine protection. Alright, that's getting us nearly to the end. Our cam home signal here isn't done yet. Again, that's another thing that I'll wait to do until I have the engine out and sitting on a stand and I have the whole harness mounted on the engine, so I can more accurately work out how this is going to be tied back and the length of it and all that sort of stuff. Same goes here. That's our cam. They got a bit of heat shrink over them to make them look a bit less obvious, but same deal with that. That needs to be in position before it's sorted out. These go under the car. I'll show you these in another video, but there's an oil temp and oil pressure, another one of the Bosch units mounted under there. That's remote. Again, remote sensors are a little bit tricky. You've got to mount them obviously remotely off the engine, but you still need to be able to get flow through them. Pressure sensors are alright, you can just run one hose to them, but anything that's temperature related you have to have flow through. So there's a little bit more involved in properly setting up a remote mounted flow through temperature sensor. I think that's about it, folks. Well, these are, that's water temperature, and this other little guy here, that's the water temperature just for your gauge on the dash. This here, I'm not actually using the Nissan coolant temperature sensor anymore. I'm just using a generic GM sensor that's the same thread, the same size, and cheaper. So yeah, using that, and that's about it, folks. So as daunting as this seems, folks, it's really not that hard. As long as you kind of just keep your head into the wiring loom, approach things in small measures, like don't try to work on everything at once, you know, like it's a lot of wires when it's all sitting together, but if you're only working on one small section, there's not a whole lot to deal with. And yeah, just reference stuff, check everything, check. This has been checked a million times. And when I got to the stage of the final finished thing that you see here, I've actually back probed all the connectors and the whole loom with a multimeter and checked that every single connector is connecting all the way down there to the ECU connector and all the way to the end of the sensor or the injector or whatever is going to work. So I know that there are no issues within the loom. The only issues that I could potentially have now is configuration and setup stuff, you know. So I hope you like this rather long video of, you know, building a custom wiring loom for the Z32. This can actually be applied to any car. It's the same process involved with it all the same techniques and all that sort of stuff. And as always, folks, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And as always, folks, I'll bloody well see you on the next one. Cheers. Oh, nearly forgot, folks. This is the, oh, where are we? This is your battery positive and your starter motor loom here. I've redone this as well. This was in a pretty sad sort of a state. It had been butchered from the fully sick battery conversion that had been done on this thing, battery relocation. But yeah, it's all been completely stripped. Lots of processes done with this. I've even used a light acid and cleaned up some of the wire and re-crimped new terminals on and stuff like that. It was just sort of a bit of a mess. But yeah, a bit of heat protection there. Yeah, it's all looking pretty good. And this is another one I've done at the same time, folks, while I was in wiring mode. This is the gearbox and an alternator loom that connects all into this sort of stuff. So that's ready to go. It's all been stripped and checked, and all the connectors and everything were all good on this. It's had a lot of contact spray put into it, and you know, all these connectors have been taken apart. All the factory connectors all cleaned and checked that there's nothing wrong with anything before it's been sort of reassembled and everything. So this is again, it's all been tested and back probed and all that sort of stuff. So it's got a full bill of health and ready to go back on the car. So lots of wiring to work through, folks. Lots of wiring to work through. I haven't even started on the main sort of body harness in the engine bay in that area yet, but it all needs the same sort of treatment. Anyway, folks, catch you later.